What's up, everybody? It is the DraftKings TV NFL Divisional Playoffs preview here on DKTV. I'm your host, Dan Strafford, in for David Kitchen today, joined by Geoff Ulrich, Ryan Noonan, Adam Levitan, and we're going to break down these 4 games for you, go over injury news, and get you ready for these contests this coming weekend. Now, Geoff, we're going to kick off with some injury news. We'll go conference by conference here, and there's a lot to take in on both conferences and question marks throughout. So why don't you take us through?
Yeah, so we'll start with Arizona, Green Bay. Arizona's coming into this game pretty healthy. They really don't have too many people listed on the injury report. Everyone on offense looks good. David Johnson is still starting running back, but Andre Ellington's back. So you'll see him used a little bit. All 3 of their receivers are healthy. They have one guard, Mike Mutapi, who's limited practice, but he looks like he's going to be okay too. I guess if he missed, that would affect the Packers pass rush. But Arizona's really coming to this game pretty healthy. Everyone on offense is going to be good. The Packers are probably the team with the biggest question mark in the NFC. They still have a couple of their O-linemen out. David Bakhtiari, he's questionable, although he did get in a limited practice this week. So if he's back, that's going to really help Green Bay because they really struggled against Arizona in their last matchup with the pass rush. Offensively, Devontae Adams missed practice on Wednesday. He looks like he's going to miss. So that would open up some targets for guys like Richard Rodgers. Rodgers did practice limited. He looks like he's going to be okay. So did Eddie Lacy. He was limited. So Green Bay, I should say, is coming in a little bit banged up. They're definitely the team with more injuries. So something to keep an eye on, especially with Devontae Adams. Going to Seattle and Carolina. These 2 teams are really pretty healthy for the most part, especially Carolina. The only guy even listed is Fozzie Whitaker right now. Jonathan Stewart's back, though, so he's probably going to get a full workload anyways, so that's not really a big deal. Seattle-wise, big news, Marshawn Lynch. He practiced in full again this Wednesday, but he also practiced in full all last week too, so it's really tough to tell if he's going to play yet. He probably won't know until Friday. Keep an eye on that. If he doesn't go, Christine Michael going to get a big workload. Pretty much other than that, though, those 2 teams are really healthy. That should be a really good matchup.
The Marshawn Lynch story in general is an interesting one to watch as he heads towards potentially parting ways with Seattle and how they handle him, injury or not, coming into this game and the rest of the playoffs if they move on. Now, Mr. Levitan, over in the AFC, some major question marks for New England on their injury front. And then Pittsburgh obviously has the most question marks you could have when your quarterback and star wide receiver have some injuries to deal with. What do we have in the AFC?
Yeah, before we get to the injury report, I want to say, for those of you guys that don't know Ryan Noonan, he won the listener league of our podcast and then played me and Al and Peter in a 4-man and won that too. So I'm out for blood. Ryan has some of my money, and I'm not happy about it. All right, let me get to the injuries. On the Patriots side, yeah, I mean, Julian Edelman has been out since week 10 because of a broken foot. He practiced on a limited basis ahead of week 16 and week 17. So I would really expect him to be near 100% for this game. And when Julian Edelman is near 100%, he plays 90% of the snaps. He's going to get 8 to 12 targets. It's just like a lock. So I think Julian Edelman is pretty safe. On the other side of the ball, Jeremy Maclin, it's so weird. Like they were like, Jeremy Maclin may have retorn his right ACL for the 3rd time. Chiefs fear Jeremy Maclin tears ACL, and then it comes out on Wednesday that he has a sprained ankle. It's like, how do we go from this guy possibly re-tearing his ACL for the 3rd time to spraining an ankle? But either way, if he plays, I would expect him to be limited. I mean, they're referring to this as a high ankle sprain. Macklin's direct backup is Chris Conley, who we can talk about when we get to that game. As for the other game, as Dan mentioned, I mean, it's a mess for Pittsburgh, and this is the last game of the slate. There was a report early in the week, like Monday morning, that Antonio Brown is unlikely to be cleared out of the concussion protocol. I personally find it hard to believe that somebody knows 7 days, 6 days before a game if somebody's going to be cleared out of the concussion protocol. And we've seen things like this before with star players, like, oh, it's a miracle. It's Saturday night and Antonio Brown got cleared out of the concussion protocol. So it's just tough because this is the last game. So that's going to be a real late swap strategy type deal. D'Angelo Williams, I'm not expecting to play again. Expect Fitzgerald Toussaint or Croissant or whatever you want to call him to be in there. And then for Denver, Peyton Manning will be starting this game, even though he's, unbelievably withered at this point.
He's 400 years old. And as far as Macklin's concerned, from what I understand, the foot bone is connected to the leg bone. So maybe that's where the confusion came in with the injury. But it's amazing how quickly that injury news can get out there and run rampant with Twitter now. This instant news source is great, but it also can cause some stories to gain legs that should not. But let's dive into these games, gentlemen, if we do. And Ryan, let's start with you. Let's get you in on the action here. This Kansas City at New England game. Adam just touched on some of the details therein, but where are we looking on the Kansas City side of the ball? Do you see them as viable options heading into New England in this playoff contest?
There's so hard with just 4 games. So, only 8 squads to pick from. So from a viability standpoint, obviously there's some plays that could be on the docket here, but, I feel like the narrative here, definitely some recency bias. Obviously, we remember what we last saw, and we last saw the Chiefs absolutely whoop up on the Texans. And, we've seen the Pats really struggle in the few weeks since we lost Edelman. This is a team that was just run shot like they've done in the past when everyone's healthy and firing on all cylinders, and really been a shell of themselves since we lost Edelman there. Just totally different squad. So the Chiefs, again, we saw the 38 zip, but then, the last few weeks of the regular season, this team, in a game that they needed, barely beat the Browns at home. They barely beat the Chargers at home, struggled to beat the Raiders. So it's not like a team that's setting the world on fire. I know that defense is playing well, but there's just not a lot of options here. I think you can get away with Alex Smith in cash if that's your plan as far as viability on offense. I'm not a big fan of him on for tournaments, just because I don't think he has the upside to be able to knock out some of the just sheer volume that you're going to be able to get from some of the other passes on the slate, some incredible passers. I do like New England in this game. I think that they're a 5-point favorite, so I think that hurts a little bit of the running backs. Obviously, it's been a really good way for Ware lately. He's been, Sharkhandrick has been the bell cow a little bit while he was, didn't have anyone to worry about at first. But Ware definitely been getting the goal line carries too. He's a smaller back as far as his stature, but a little bit bigger for goal line. So I think that he's more the play, but I don't think that the game flow is going to set up well for him here.
Now, Jeff,
Kelsey too. Kelsey's been hot.
Jeff, if we look at this backfield for Kansas City, as Ryan was just saying, Ware's gotten the goal line. The question mark around him is a potential injury, trying to make heads or tails of what's going on there. Do you see any flyer potential for Niall Davis? We're not chasing a kick return per se, but if Ware is out, Jeff, do you see some potential for Niall Davis to maybe vulture some carries away from West?
Yeah, I mean, West hasn't played great lately, so that could happen, especially now Davis got back in the good graces with his big kick return last week. So I guess I'd really watch the injury news there and just really see what the Chiefs might be thinking about if for some reason Spencer Ware can't go or is really limited. I think he's still pretty risky. I would think West would get the first crack there with Davis maybe being the reserve guy, but he could come on. I mean, he's probably a more talented back. So overall, I do think I agree with a lot of what Ryan just said. I think the Chiefs are a little bit risky this week. I don't like their defense as much against Tom Brady, who just isn't even close to what Brian Hoyer was. The other thing with Brady, that's obviously the most obvious statement. The other thing was real hot thing. The other thing with Brady you have to consider is he gets Julian Edelman back, and when Julian Edelman's been on the field, his pass completion goes up. His yards per attempt goes up. Everything gets better when Julian Edelman is on the field. Rob Gronkowski recorded 5 100-yard receiving games and 8 touchdowns in 9 games with Julian Edelman on the field. Since then, he's had none. He's had no 100-yard receiving games. So it's a big factor that Julian Edelman is going to be back in this game, and I think this sets up well for Edelman to possibly even have a big day and be one of the best targets this week. The Chiefs haven't been good against slot receivers. They let Randall Cobb and Emmanuel Sanders go nuts earlier in the year. So, I think that there's maybe some people will probably be overlooking the Patriots offense just because of recency bias. So I think there's some argument to be made for Brady as a really good target on the slate. He's probably not my favorite quarterback, but I'm definitely not writing him off completely this week.
Now, Adam, the Patriots backfield give you anybody you're comfortable with, or is this just too much of a mess with White and Bolden and Jackson to pick one of those three?
Yeah, I think I prefer the pass game. I mean, Kansas City's defensive line is so stout. I mean, if I was going to go anywhere, I would go to James White, but he has crept up to the point where we're really going to struggle to really profit off his salary up at 5,200. Like, yeah, I think James White is a good bet to catch between 3 and 6 passes, but a lot of those will be short passes that can be swallowed up pretty quickly, and he's only going to get 1 to 4 carries. Steven Jackson is not the kind of player I would ever roster. And if I was ever running an NFL team, which at this point appears pretty unlikely, he's not the kind of player I would ever sign to my team either.
So you're telling us you didn't win the Powerball last night?
I don't play that garbage. Come on. You know me. I don't play
that. Let's stick with you, Adam, and move on to Green Bay at Arizona. Well, let me ask you this first, Adam. Is Gronkowski in play? Is this a Gronkowski week, or do you see a better option in Kelsey or another tight end?
Yeah, so I mean, there's only really 3 tight ends I think you can possibly play this week: Kelsey, Gronkowski, and Greg Olsen. So yeah, Gronkowski is certainly in play. He's a guy that I have gone out of my way to avoid for much of the year, just because I think his salary remains inflated because like the DraftKings algorithm takes into account ownership, and people keep clicking Gronk even though he never meets value. Geoff brought up some good points about how he's improved with Edelman out there. I haven't thought too hard about that. Maybe that's a factor. I'll have to look into that. But my first instinct is to go down to Olsen or Kelsey. I am a little scared of Kelsey, recency bias and all that. I think last week was the best game he's played almost all year, and I highly doubt he's able to do that against Chandler Jones and those guys.
It's a situation with Kelsey and Macklin. We've seen a big split in targets, and depending on who gets more is who performs. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But Adam, sticking with you, Green Bay at Arizona. Speaking of ownership percentage for Gronkowski, what will David Johnson's ownership percentage be this week? Are we seeing a large uptick this week?
Yeah, I think around 70% in most tournaments. I mean, last week there were 0 running backs for people to feel confident about. This week there is exactly 1. I can't imagine anybody, unless you're consciously thinking about fading, which I know some people will, but like most people are just going to click on David Johnson, and for good reason. I mean, so talented and plays all 3 downs, plays goal line, plays pass game, is in the highest total game, is at home. Like there is just, I can't imagine me making a lineup without David Johnson, even though I love to fade. It's just on a 4-game slate, it's hard to find somebody to pivot to.
Ryan, keeping on Arizona here, we have these wide receivers who over the past, let's say 6 to 8 weeks have been really hard to peg down of who is going to be the one to step up, who's going to be the main target of Palmer. Do you see one that steps out this week in the playoffs? Do you go to the old veteran in Fitzgerald, or is this just still too much of a mess of who's going to see the targets to make a educated guess and feel it trustworthy heading into this slate?
I think we know enough about what we've seen recently from them. I feel like we had, old man River dusted himself off in the preseason, and it was fresh in September, and Fitz looked great. But really since the first 4 or 5 weeks, he's really just been, he's had some games here and there, but just a slot guy. It's really been Michael Floyd, and he is the cheapest of the 3 as well. Solid averaged up to the target too. So if we're looking at big plays down the field, he's a guy that could take advantage of the Sam Shields concussion, who's probably out for Green Bay, like they were talking about earlier. So I feel like he's probably the best bet of the 3. Obviously, Brown's pretty cheap as well at just 5,200. So I actually think that you can actually get Fitzgerald if you're looking for tournaments to be contrarian, because I think he'll probably be the lesser owned of the 3.
Geoff, let's look at Green Bay here, and you can obviously give your opinion on Arizona as well, not precluding you from that discussion, but we have some injuries here, potential offensive line. You mentioned the receiving core is still a bit of a mess. What do you see from Green Bay on offense?
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll just touch on Arizona first, because I did forget to mention Sam Shields actually did return to practice yesterday. So it's looking like he's going to play, which might affect who really sort of you target in Arizona. He'd probably cover Michael Floyd, which really downgrades Floyd a bit, in my opinion. I do like the Fitzgerald call there that Ryan made. I think that Green Bay's had trouble covering tight ends, and Fitzgerald's doing a lot of his work over the middle, like a tight end right now. So I think I'd be kind of on board with that. But yeah, definitely watch the news on Shields, because it looks like he might be returning. But Green Bay-wise, they really sort of picked it up last week. Now, that was against Washington. So Washington's secondary is bad. This is a completely different challenge this week. They did switch to like a fast-paced, higher tempo offense to try and take that pressure off Aaron Rodgers, and it worked. I expect them to do the same thing here. I think you're going to see a real fast-paced game. I think that, the game total's at 50, so I do think that both sides are in play this week. If Davante Adams misses, you could take a look at Jared Abbrederis as like a mid-price play. I prefer Richard Rodgers. I think he'd be the one who would see a few more targets. I think Aaron Rodgers just trusts him more. Richard Rodgers isn't super athletic or anything, so I don't know if you can expect like a massive 100-yard game, but he gets targeted a lot in the red zone. So I think at, whatever he is, 4K or so, I think he's an interesting value play. I'd expect Patrick Peterson to probably shadow Randall Cobb around the field for the most part. Although that could change if James Jones starts, accumulating passes again, which he has the past 3 or 4 weeks. So I think Jones still makes for the great value play. I think Randall Cobb's a bit more of a tournament sort of iffy play, especially if Peterson's going to be on him.
Let's move on to the Seattle and Carolina game, Geoff. And sticking with you, is this where you go for quarterback play? I mean, Russell against Carolina. Carolina's defense has been very good this season. On the other side, you have the Seattle defense, which has been very good again as we run into the playoffs. Is there potential for them to run the ball more against these defenses, or are you staying away from quarterback play in this one?
No, I really like the quarterbacks in this game, and I think the quarterback I like the most is Russell Wilson. I love the fact that people are going to look back last week and say, oh, the Seattle's offense only put up, 10 points or whatever, right? And they're not going to factor in the fact that it was minus 100 and they were playing on Hoth, right? And there were Imperial Stormtroopers, in snowsuits. But, I think this is a great bounce back spot. I really do. The Seattle offense was pretty much unstoppable before that. Russell Wilson's playing great. I also think that Carolina is going to have problems with their secondary. Peanut Tillman's out. Their secondary is pretty thin after Josh Norman. Like, Cortland Finnegan is not a good cornerback anymore. Josh Norman can't cover both Tyler Lockett and Doug Baldwin on every play. The Seahawks have been doing great work around the red zone, getting Doug Baldwin open using a variety of different schemes. I think I really like Doug Baldwin in this game, but I also like Tyler Lockett just for the same reason that once Norman goes over to Baldwin, that frees up Lockett for a deep ball. So I really like the Seattle offense in this game. I like Russell Wilson. He's probably my favorite choice at quarterback this week. And I like both the receivers too.
Now, Adam, sticking with these Seattle wide receivers, do you give any play to Jermaine Kearse, who had a good 3 or 4 week run heading into the playoffs as a really low-end option as part of this Seahawks offense?
I don't really play Jermaine Kearse. I know some people do. I mean, here's my thing. Josh Norman plays on the outside almost exclusively. I mean, he's only in the slot 2% of the time, and Doug Baldwin plays in the slot 83% of the time. Like, I would expect Josh Norman to be on the outside, seeing Lockett, seeing Kearse the majority of his snaps, and just their defense as a whole. I don't know. I'm not really on Kearse or Lockett in this spot. Oh, that might come back to bite me, but I'm not.
What about the running backs in this contest? We have Jonathan Stewart back. You have the question marks around Fozzie Whitaker on the Carolina side, and then the question marks for Marshawn Lynch that were talked about earlier in the injury update. Christine Michael viable? Is he somebody that you're going to lean on? You mentioned David Johnson's the only one you trust. Who are the other running backs that you might be filling in with?
Yeah, I think I like Fitzgerald Croissant more than I do these guys in this game. I mean, I know Jonathan Stewart's going to be popular. Yeah, he's a good bet for 18 to 20 carries, just like he got all regular season. But the Seattle Seahawks are just, even on the road, dominant against running backs. We saw what they did to Adrian Peterson last week. They ranked first in rush yards allowed per game, ranked first in yards per carry allowed per game during the season, top 4 DVOA against the run. So I don't know. I don't think I can play Jonathan Stewart. I kind of want to go naked Cam more than I want to do anything else with Carolina.
Let's round this out, Ryan, by starting to talk about Pittsburgh and Denver. Obviously, major question marks around this Pittsburgh offense with Ben and with Antonio Brown. Where do you start with Pittsburgh? Waiting on news, as Adam alluded to before. This may be a late swap situation for a lot of people, but Ben and Antonio Brown aren't cheap. So this is going to be a lot of game theory and roster construction, trying to figure out who you can swap in, who you can swap out. All things being equal, and Antonio, let's say they're healthy, are they top options for you?
Yeah, I mean, if we have Antonio on the slate, I think he's a must play. Obviously, he lit them up a couple weeks ago, as did Ben, threw for 380 and 3 scores on them, and that's something we haven't seen all year against Denver. They've been fantastic. I agree with Adam. I like Fitzgerald Toussaint here because I can't see the Steelers just trying to bang the ball with Todman and Toussaint. I feel like there was 8 targets for Toussaint last week. I feel like he'd be featured a little bit in the passing game. The struggle is Ben, right? So how healthy is that shoulder? So I feel like it's going to be a high volume passing game, but are we going to be compromised as far as his strength to be able to go deep down the fields? You're looking at both Wheaton and who am I forgetting the other? Martavis. These guys have averaged up to target of 15, 16 yards. So that doesn't really set up well for a guy who's got a banged up shoulder. So it'd be interesting to see the reports on practice, how strong Ben's arm is, because I feel like he's going to have to be a pretty high volume passer this week. But I do like that. I like Toussaint. He's probably my favorite play on Pittsburgh.
Jeff, where do we begin in this contest? What are we looking at? How are you breaking this one down? And being it's the last game on the slate, does that concern you from a roster construction standpoint?
Yeah, this whole game concerns me for fantasy. I mean, I feel like this is like, for some reason, first of all, I feel like Pittsburgh's going to win, but I feel like they're going to win with like Darius Hayward-Bay and someone like that and just do something crazy. Or their defense is going to score twice and pick off Peyton Manning. So it's a really hard game to target for fantasy, I think. The Steelers' run D is really good. You'd expect the Broncos to go run heavy, though. So that that cancels it out right there, too. So you have Ronnie Hillman and C.J. Anderson, who really produced at the end of the season, especially against a weak rush team like San Diego, but they're running into a completely different animal this week, and I'm not sure I like either. So, Hillman's getting a little bit more work in the pass game, but and then you have Peyton Manning back at QB. He threw 9 passes last week and got like 70 yards. Big deal. I mean, he's still throwing a ton of interceptions. Demaryius Thomas is going on record. Oh, he looks like he's young. Demaryius Thomas was saying all preseason how good Peyton Manning looked. So don't buy into this narrative that he's somehow, he's taken rest and now he's like a teenager again. That's garbage. Like, he's still Peyton Manning. He's still 40. He still has very limited arm issues. I like the Steelers defense as a play this week, to be honest. I think they have a really good pass rush, and I think they could get to him. So I don't love this game at all. I think you got to keep an eye on obviously the situation for Pittsburgh. Heath Miller might be an interesting play if Antonio Brown sits. That's the only other thing I'd say.
Now, I want to get all 3 of your take on this, and Jeff, we'll start with you. How much of a narrative is the announcement that Al Jazeera America is folding after their expose on Peyton Manning? How are we focused? Are we really looking at the details that matter most?
Yeah.
I didn't even read that story. Jerry doesn't like that story either. I'm not down with that story.
Narratives are narratives. They're fun for a reason. But gentlemen, if we round this out and start talking about our predictions, final thoughts, and maybe where you're starting roster construction, Jeff, let's start with you. Where do you think these games are going to end up? Who's your top targets? Who do you think are the guys to start your roster construction around?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to consider that David Johnson's going to be 80 to 85% owned or something like that in a lot of tournaments. But at the same time, he's the safest play. I think running back's got a ton of question marks, so you can take some risks there. Guy like James Starks stands out. A quarterback, I already mentioned, I really like Russell Wilson. A tight end, I do like a tight end wide receiver. I do like the Patriots options. I think Julian Edelman's got a great shot to have a big game, and I think people might be scared off of him just because of the injury issue. So I'm really targeting Julian Edelman at wide receiver. Probably going to go with Wilson as my quarterback, and maybe consider someone like Cam or Aaron Rodgers if I was going a little bit, making a different lineup.
Ryan, over to you. What do you think of these games overall? Who do you think's moving on, and who are you starting to target from a roster construction standpoint?
Well, a couple of things. I know the guys talked about it, and I know I've heard Adam talk about it on the solo pod too. So when you're thinking about game theory, you're thinking about correlation plays, and it just changes in a 4-game slate. You have to vary up and don't be afraid to do things a little bit differently. We obviously have 8 teams left in the playoffs and divisional rounds. We have good teams and good defenses, so we obviously have some less than ideal matchups. But I really like the Patriots' passing offense here. I feel like Brady splits. If you look at the RotoViz's game split app, Brady with Edelman, totally different guy, 337, about 2.6 touchdowns a game. and 247 and, barely 1.7 touchdowns a game without him. So I feel like Vollmer's back to be able to protect his blind side. I feel like they're going to be able to exploit that quick passing offense. So I like Brady in tournaments because I feel like the public will be off of him, what we've seen lately.
Adam, to you to close us out. Predictions. Who are you starting roster construction around? And if you guys have any, some hot takes are always welcome here to close out the show.
I see. It's like I kind of think, and myself included, like people kind of like outsmart themselves. Even though we think David Johnson's going to be 80, like maybe he'll only be 50 or 60. Like last week in double ups, Jordan Reed was only 64% owned. It's like insanity. So I think I'm more likely to eat the chalk, and I think the chalk this week is Carson and David Johnson together. It's not really a negative correlation because David Johnson is so good in the pass game. We saw him go for 88 receiving yards in like half of a game against the Packers last time. So I think I'm on Carson and David Johnson together to start off.
And on the other side, would you go Toussaint and Pittsburgh D, get a double stack in there of Palmer and Johnson, and then Toussaint and the correlation with the Pittsburgh D against, I forget what word you used to describe Peyton, withered. The withered one.
Man, he's so withered. Yeah, I don't know. I hate using defenses on the road, and that obviously bit me last week because I did not have any Kansas City defense. So, like, my weekend was, like, over. Like, I couldn't win any money at, like, 5 o'clock on Saturday, which was pretty disheartening. So maybe I need to rethink that, but I'm thinking that I'm going to try to land on a home defense. So I don't know if I'll be on Denver, if I'll be on Pittsburgh, especially because I like Demaryius. I think me and Geoff might disagree. I think the nature of Peyton Manning's witheredness is kind of good for Demaryius because he throws so many bubble screens, and that's good for Demaryius.
Do we have a stat to measure witheredness? Is that
you multiply age times like pain on face when you try to throw the ball more than 20 yards.
Divided by neck surgeries, I would assume. Throw that
times 9 1 and outs in the playoffs. So.
Times Al Jazeera reports.
Gentlemen, as always, great content here on DraftKings TV. Adam Levitan, Ryan Noonan, and Geoff Ulrich. You find them across DraftKings property, the playbook, DK TV as well. If you guys are playing this weekend, best of luck. Be sure to stay tuned as well for the live finals. For the DK finals, 10 contestants vying for that top prize. Keep an eye on the DK playbook for more there. So best of luck this weekend. We'll see you back here on DraftKings TV.